The Stone Zone, with legendary Republican strategist and political icon and pundit Roger Stone. Stone has served as a senior campaign aide to 3 Republican presidents. He is a New York Times best-selling author and a longtime friend and advisor of President Donald Trump. As an outspoken libertarian, Stone has appeared on thousands of broadcasts, spoken at countless venues, and lectured before the prestigious Oxford Political Union and the Cambridge Union Society. Due to his 4+ decades in the political and cultural arena, Stone has become a pop culture icon. And now, here's your host, Roger Stone.
Welcome to another episode of the Stone Zone with Roger Stone. I am obviously not Roger Stone. I am Mark Vargas, the editor-in-chief of Illinois Review. Roger will be back with you next week. But it is T-minus 3 days before President Donald Trump is inaugurated as the 47th president of the United States. And we've got so much to talk about, and he's got so much work to do in order to right the ship after 4 years of disastrous policies that have destroyed our country within and destroyed our reputation around the globe. But before we get started on all of this, what's the Stone Zone without a little bit of Roger Stone? Let's watch this clip.
Donald Trump and his associates were subjected to the greatest single dirty trick in American political history. That is nothing less than an abuse of power in which the full authority of the United States government and the extraordinary capability of our intelligence agencies were used to utilize what they knew was fraudulent evidence, the Steele dossier, and the false claim that the Democrat National Committee had been the subject of an online hack by Russian assets, and that information had been lagged to the Trump campaign. This is a lie the American people saw through. I was a target in this simply because I am a 45-year friend and supporter of the president. But now when we examine these things, because that is an act of treason, we're accused of being for revenge or retribution. No, my friends, what we seek is a rebalance of the scales of justice so this country can return to one standard of justice, not the two-tiered justice system.
And it is true, under the last 4 years of the Biden administration, there has been a two-tiered justice system, one for the Democrats and one for President Trump and his supporters. And we've heard this so often from those on the left that as soon as President Trump gets into office, he is going to be going after his political enemies. And that could be further from the truth. When President Trump takes office on Monday at 12 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time, he's going to make sure that we balance the scales of justice and that we don't use agencies like the FBI and DOJ and utilize those resources to target American citizens, conservative American citizens, and to target political enemies like President Donald Trump. Those days must come to an end because we are the laughing stock around the world. We are no longer the United States of America, but we've delved into a third world country. This is what happens in Venezuela and in North Korea and in China, where they jailed their political opponents. They create fake crimes. And so what President Trump is going to do is restore equal justice under law, the words written across the United States Supreme Court building above the door. And he's going to ensure that the justice system is used to go after real enemies of America, real and dangerous and credible threats to American citizens, not political opponents. We've got so much to talk about, in terms of the hearings. And there's no better clip that represents the insanity on the left. And I think it really is a mental illness. But let's watch this clip during yesterday's Senate confirmation hearing with Governor Doug Burgum for the Interior Secretary, and the Democrat senator from Hawaii asked the most absurd question. Let's take a look.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome. As part of my responsibilities to ensure the fitness of nominees before any of the committees on which I sit, I asked the following two initial questions. First is, since you became a legal adult, have you ever made unwanted requests for sexual favors or committed any verbal or physical harassment or assault of a sexual nature?
No, Senator, I have not.
Have you ever faced discipline or entered into a settlement related to this kind of conduct?
I have not.
So for all of the challenges facing our country, not only here at home and abroad, but the challenges facing Doug Burgum, should he be confirmed by the United States Senate to serve as the Secretary of the Interior, your senators are allotted only a certain amount of minutes to give a speech or to ask questions. And this is the very first question that she asks. Have you sexually assaulted anybody? I mean, she's basically saying, have you raped anyone? Please tell us on record. Again, it shows how far the left has gone in terms of losing complete and utter focus of what's really important, and that's making America great again. And it's yet just another example why President Donald Trump won by such a wide and massive mandate on November 5th. The Democrats have completely lost touch with the American people, and it's why Republicans now control the White House, the U.S. House of Representatives, the United States Senate, and the United States Supreme Court. We've got a tremendous guest, and I think I'm going to bring him in a little bit early here. We've got a tremendous guest, and I think he's waiting there to join us. But Edward Szall, an investigative reporter and producer of the movie Died Suddenly. We had Ed and his colleague Matt last just a few days on the StoneZONE to talk about Died Suddenly and Died Suddenly 2, offering a sneak peek. But Ed is also an investigative journalist who's been paying very close attention to what's happening here in across the country in terms of breaking news. And I'd like to welcome him to the show so that we can break down some things about what's happening with President Biden, his farewell speech, and so many other news that are important for the StoneZONE listeners. So with that, I'd like to welcome Edward Szall to the StoneZONE. Edward, how are you?
Thank you. Thank you, Mark. Good morning to you from DC. And give my best to Roger, of course. I hope he is feeling better for the inauguration, because you know what? There's no one else in the world that deserves to be there to see the victory, and honestly, the victory in legacy. I think that this has probably been the hardest fight Roger has ever fought, and that is to get President Trump back in office, but also to vindicate MAGA at large. I mean, it wasn't just Roger that he was fighting for. He was obviously persecuted, but you hear in that speech from CPAC, Roger was speaking about this storm that came over the country, where injustice, persecution, and witch hunts became the norm and became the status quo at the Department of Justice, and so many people were victims of this. So again, my prayers go out to Roger, and of course, I'm looking forward to speak about many of the things today with you. And you think about that statement from that senator from Hawaii. What greater example that the Democrats they have no unction for government anymore, and maybe it's because they lack leadership. They don't have anyone left that's in charge of them, especially not the Obamas, who were seen at the turn of the 2000s as maybe this shining light for the Democrat Party. They're going to follow the Obama doctrine. Well, I can't follow a doctrine that is not whole. Michelle Obama seems to be missing. Barack Obama seems to be yucking it up with the incoming president. And I'm sure, again, all of this is shadowing what we're gonna see for the next 4 years, where the Democrats use the minimum amount of inclusion and power they have left to harass our side, as our side actually carries out the mission of making this country great again.
And Ed, I just want to be clear. Roger is feeling just fine. He is just getting ready for all these activities leading up to Monday's inauguration. And you're right. There's very few people that have gone through literal hell, who've walked through hell and back because of his personal relationship with Donald Trump. He's committed no crimes, but the left has been adamant to go after Roger Stone for the last 8 years. And guess what? They've come up with absolutely nothing. And it's only innocent men that make as much noise as Roger and President Trump and Rudy Giuliani. And we're going to be talking about that. But as we're T-minus 3 days going into the inauguration, Roger has got a lot to do and a lot to prepare for and a lot to celebrate. But Ed, I want to break down some things with you. And I'd like to start, because I don't think there has been enough focus in mainstream media on this. Of course not. Why would we expect that? Because they're dying. But I'd like to break down a little bit of President Biden's farewell address from the Oval Office. And it really is, I think, alarming, just sort of the lies and how completely and utterly out of touch that he is. And it is shocking to me that he suggested that he could have done another 4 years as president of the United States. And so we've got a couple of clips. We're going to play the first clip, which is Biden warning about ultra wealthy people running our country. Let's take a look.
I want to warn the country of some things that give me great concern. This is a dangerous concentration, and that's a dangerous concentration of power in the hands of a very few ultra wealthy people. The dangerous consequences if their abuse of power is left unchecked.
I mean, Ed, Biden's talking about very ultra wealthy people running the country under the incoming Trump administration. Can you believe this? Your thoughts on these words coming out of the Oval Office?
Well, I think dementia has hit the big guy pretty bad. He seems to have forgotten the dealings that he's done with Ukraine, China, and all these other oligarchs and national powers. You know, it's classic projection, right? The Democrats, especially Joe Biden, he wanted to maybe put some kind of stamp on his legacy before he leaves the Oval Office. But the funniest thing, I think, was that no one even paid attention to the Oval Office address. I remember hearing about much of the speech the next day. I didn't tune in live, and many people. There used to be a time when the president's speaking, regardless of party, you'd pay attention because his words have power behind it. His words will command policy. His words will command change. None of that's true with Joe Biden, and it left me thinking, especially with this, the ridiculous statements he added in there. Did we get a little glimpse again to the drama that transpired over the past year? It does seem that Joe Biden, in the mental acumen he has left, he's regretting dropping out of the race, and dropping out in such a weird fashion too. And maybe we don't have to dwell on it because we won, but you do have to look back and say it was very odd how he left the race, how he did not continue on to run, and again, being an incumbent president, you'd expect such a thing, and then you have to sit here and wonder if he. After donning the MAGA hat, after kind of speaking in a way that he's actually doing the protocols, he's meeting with the president, he's speaking with the president, incoming president. If he regrets again that Kamala Harris was able to kind of carry out that palace coup, I do think that maybe this is this speech, and you've got a couple more sound bites from this, and I think we'll be hearing this tone. It's maybe his way of showing the Democratic Party, hey, I haven't forgotten the deal. We're supposed to hate President Trump, MAGA. They're all Nazis. They're all criminals. We're gonna hold to that party line, and maybe, Mark, this is a sneak peek of their strategy over the next 4 years. They're going to try to resurrect something from the Biden-Obama legacy, where in reality there's nothing left. The energy's gone. The people have left, and also a lot of them have come to our side because our side is competent. Our side is actually presenting a vision, and our side's not complaining when we lose.
What's interesting is when he talks about oligarchs and uber wealthy people that are going to be running the country, how he forgets about George Soros, who revels in watching American cities burn like they did during 2020, who also profits off the instability and chaos that happens on American streets, who funded the campaigns of district attorneys who were for lawlessness and who despised the words law and order, who funded campaigns like the former Cook County State's Attorney Kim Foxx here in the city of Chicago, who victimized the criminals and criminalized the victims, who advocated and pushed for policies of catch and release, of no cash bail, who allowed individuals who rioted and broke into small businesses and took all of their products and merchandise with no problems at all, who also none of them were convicted of those crimes, where we see repeat offenders, violent and dangerous repeat offenders, get a slap on the wrist and are back out on the streets in Chicago committing even more crimes. I mean, these are the types of candidates that George Soros funded. And Ed, didn't President Biden award George Soros one of the highest civilian medals in our country, an award that can only be handed out by the sitting commander-in-chief and president of the United States? And let's not forget what his administration has done to assist George Soros. We're going to play this clip now.
You've indicated there's a transaction where a Soros-backed group would take ownership of over 200 radio stations across 40 different markets, after the FCC originally indicating that that transaction could be reviewed and approved at the bureau level without a commission vote. It's now become clear that that is a decision before the full commission, and it's one that I would assume now or in the near future the commission would approve. I think what's interesting about it is that the FCC here is not following its normal process for reviewing a transaction. We have established over a number of years one way in which you can get approval from the FCC when you have in excess of 25% foreign ownership, which this transaction does. And it seems to me that the FCC is poised to create, for the first time, an entirely new shortcut.
Yeah, thank you. As you pointed out here and previously, these proceedings for transfer of ownership have been expedited. What exactly makes this case so deserving of an expedited proceeding so far, from what you could tell?
There is nothing about this transaction that is out of the ordinary. It's the type of thing that we see all the time, and the FCC has a process for this. The full commission itself has never signed off on a shortcut like this. What we usually do is we require people to file a petition with us. We bring in national security agencies. They can review the foreign ownership. It's probably no big deal here, but we review that foreign ownership, and then we vote. Here, they're trying to do something that's never been done before at the commission level.
So here we have Joe Biden's administration expediting things for George Soros-owned companies so that they can further extend their control over the airwaves in order to promote all of their woke, liberal, anti-American, anti-conservative, anti-MAGA propaganda. I mean, facts don't matter in this administration, do they, Ed?
No, they don't. And it's because the Democratic Party, led by people like Barack Obama and Joe Biden, they really leaned into mindless race politics. You know, they use this as their drum of propaganda to try to sway the American people away from logic, away from reason, and away from the values that built this nation. And you look at that, for example, there's so many examples of the left and the Democrats, the ones leaning into oligarchy. I mean, just look at how they've underwritten some of the oligarchs in Ukraine and China, Africa, many of the places that race politics has converted to dollar amounts in private accounts and in offshore locations for some of these politicians. But the thing that comes to mind for me is that clearly they're trying to, out of this defeat, frame the incoming administration as being some kind of like Russian, esque state that is run by barons, run by businesses, run by corporate CEOs, when in actuality, the coalition that formed is still leaving them dumbfounded. They don't understand why blacks, Indians, Hispanics, and others have joined the white administration, the Donald Trump kind of leadership. But it's because President Trump's not racist. President Trump is a businessman. President Trump actually had a plan, and the American people responded favorably to that, left, right, and middle. And look, this is a preview of this attempted framing. Roger Stone has spoken about this much of his career, and as a student of this, paid attention to this is their pivot. Their pivot is to try to maybe drum up support from the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's, the far left. There's no excitement for them right now. They're not even protesting, Mark. Mark, I'm in the Capitol right now, and there's nothing happening. There's no resistance. And I don't think it's because they have some kind of surprise set. I think it's because the energy's been taken from the room. The left themselves are embarrassed by the statements and actions of their leadership. They wouldn't even have chosen Joe Biden, let alone Kamala Harris. There isn't a left wing right now. And instead of, I'd say, maybe crushing them completely as we've beaten them in an election, I think many of them are being welcomed over if they can agree to basic tenets of again, business, virtue, and leadership that our side will be accepting. It's not so much a big tent as much as a big vision for the country moving forward. And it's statements like this from Commissioner Carr that I think most people listen to and say, yes, I'm not a big fan of George Soros, not a big fan of Joe Biden, and certainly not a fan of the Obamas leading leading the Democratic Party. They instead are looking and say, maybe Donald Trump's not so bad. And you know what? I can tell you, he's not. Okay, he's quite amazing.
Let's talk a little bit about censorship, because you're familiar with censorship. Americans, conservative, hardworking, everyday Americans have all been censored in some way, shape, or form over the last 4 years of the Biden administration, the same administration that is against free speech, who's pro-censorship and anti-free speech, and no clearer example of that than when parents, everyday moms and dads, were peacefully speaking and exercising their First Amendment rights at school board meetings and opposing literature and curriculum that talked about in great detail, very graphic sexual content that, by the way, Ed, as when I had a radio show, the FCC prohibited me from reading the contents in those books that they were teaching to young children, to elementary school students and middle school students. The radio station would have been fined, and I could have been potentially pulled off the air if I were to read the literature, the contents of it, what's in those textbooks that they're teaching to children. Yet at the same time, they're saying that the woke liberal left in the Biden administration is saying it's okay to teach this content to children. But we're talking about censorship and calling those parents who are opposing that domestic terrorists. I mean, it's completely outrageous. But this censorship has been a real big issue I know about in cancellation. I currently have a lifetime buddy pass ban on United Airlines because I am a Trump supporter. United is a woke, liberal company run by a CEO, Scott Kirby, who likes to prance around in women's lingerie. There are photos of that. I am not making that up. But Joe Biden has the audacity during his speech in the Oval Office, his farewell speech, to talk about Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg removing fact checkers on social media. And we're going to break this down a little bit, Ed, but it was his exact same administration, as Zuckerberg said on the Joe Rogan show, that Biden administration officials were calling Facebook and yelling and screaming and using profanity, telling them to take down posts from conservatives that were actually telling the truth. They were truthful posts. But let's take a look at this clip of Joe Biden talking about the removal of fact checkers.
Social media is giving up on fact-checking. The truth is smothered by lies told for power and for profit. We must hold the social platforms accountable to protect our children, our families, and our very democracy from the abuse of power.
How quickly he's forgotten that these were his allies in 2020. Right? How quickly has he forgotten that it was the very social media oligarchs now he's now condemning and saying they're not doing enough curation that agreed to allow their platforms to be weaponized against conservatives. It's very hilarious to hear President Biden criticize, quote, the fact-checking removal when, again, this is just another chapter of propaganda. It's the truth is, and I look at it maybe in both lights, as both that the CEOs like Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, and Elon Musk, the new head of X, they saw the writing on the wall, some sooner than others. I mean, I can speak specifically to Mark Zuckerberg uniquely because Mark Zuckerberg had actually looked at moving to my hometown during the Biden years, about 2021, 2022. He talked about moving to a more conservative area so he could attend a private school, for his child, and he wanted a quiet life before he got into UFC and these other things. I bring this up to say, I think that as we now know, Mark Zuckerberg knew this wasn't about virtue. It wasn't about being right. It was about being bullied. Not only was he cursed at and screamed at, I can recall that Mark Zuckerberg actually on an internal call with his team and his executives, he told people to be wary of the mRNA shots. Because we talk about misinformation and censorship, a lot of the latest generation of that came during the pandemic, and it really did cause a chilling effect across our movement. Many people, we know, Mark, that they lost their accounts and lost their accounts till today, and are looking hopefully at getting them back through Mark Zuckerberg's pledge for freedom of speech. But this leaked call, I think it came out through Project Veritas, if I recall. It was basically Mark Zuckerberg saying, I think mRNA vaccines are untested and they might change the DNA of an individual. It could kill somebody, could cause problems. And again, Mark Zuckerberg, it's like hypocrisy. You and I, we're upstanding enough to admit when we're wrong and to bow out when we've made a fool of ourselves. Not that we do that often, but the other side, they don't care. They don't care about hypocrisy. They don't care about shame. And when it came to the subject of misinformation, I'll tell you, a lot of people died because the proper information was not allowed to be shared on Facebook. You can thank the misinformation guardians, at Facebook and these others. They're now the guardians being removed, the ones that allowed our parents to be propagandized, allowed our grandparents and parents to be lied to. We're never going to go back. We're never going to go back. And I think many of us who've been censored, and you too, I mean, it's crazy that you would have been removed from the airwaves for reading what was demanded to be approved in a library for children, right? And again, we were living in a mad time. The time is now for us to come back to sanity. And this latest statement by Joe Biden, look, get done with your prompter and get out of that office, okay? No one believes a word you're saying, and I go back to this. That's why no one tuned in. Can you imagine a time, Mark, where the sitting president of the United States, the man who's supposed to be one of the most powerful people in the world, no one's even paying attention to him. They're just waiting, counting down the days for him to get lost, to get out of there, so a real president could come back in.
And finally, the last point on Biden's speech, because I take a particular interest in this because of my time at the Pentagon working for the Secretary of Defense and being in Iraq 14 times as a civilian. Here you have Joe Biden, whose foreign policy was essentially over the last 4 years was to embolden our enemies and our adversaries and make Americans less safe, not only here at home through his wild open borders policy, which he campaigned on in 2020. Elect me and I will make sure our borders are wide open, which triggered countries like Venezuela to literally empty their jails and prisons of the most violent criminals that they had and send them up to the United States because of our open border policies. You can't forget about Afghanistan and that horrific withdrawal, which led to the loss of American military service members. It sent the message that we can abandon our closest allies. If we can abandon our own service members, we'll certainly abandon our own allies in Afghanistan. We saw what's happening in Ukraine and Russia and Israel and Hamas. But this ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas, Joe Biden is all over this, trying to take credit. Let's watch this clip of his Oval Office address.
Speaking to you tonight from the Oval Office. Before I begin, let me speak to important news from earlier today. After 8 months of nonstop negotiation, my administration, a ceasefire and a hostage deal has been reached by Israel and Hamas, the elements of which I laid out in great detail in May of this year. This plan was developed and negotiated by my team and will be largely implemented by the incoming administration. That's why I told my team to keep the incoming administration fully informed, because that's how it should be, working together as Americans. This will be my final address to you from the American people, from the Oval Office, from this desk as president.
I mean, and first of all, he can't even read the teleprompter correct. This will be my first address from the American people. I mean, the words, average Americans, they can't see what's happening behind the Oval Office, but the words are literally this big on a giant 72-inch flat screen. It's not even a teleprompter. It's a 72-inch flat screen that's literally 3 feet in front of him with gigantic words, and he's still fumbling and bumbling while reading from a gigantic teleprompter. But Ed, your thoughts on Biden, whose foreign policy destroyed our country and our country's reputation, now trying to take credit for this ceasefire deal in Israel?
Well, it's funny because they're not his words. They're not his words. His team, the Mandarins have been running him for the last 4 years, wrote that speech, rolled him out, have kept him alive long enough for his party to lose the most significant kind of battle in this last century. And I look to his foreign policy. You mentioned several of the battlefields. This world is in such a terrible place after 4 years of Joe Biden. American strength is so important. I'm a soldier, and I don't want to see any more wars. They say soldiers are sometimes the best barometers for whether you should fight a conflict, whether you should go to a conflict, because a soldier doesn't want to fight unless it's absolutely necessary. I think about the wars that have happened under Joe Biden's watch, and I think about his statements as such. He's claiming credit for a deal that he literally had no role in. We think about I think it was Stephen Witkoff, the ambassador, envoy, basically envoy in elect, because he's not officially in a position of power yet, was able to go over and do what Joe Biden refused to do over the last 2 years. President Trump commands respect. You've already seen this morning. He had a call with Xi Jinping. I think we can look at the logs. It's been quite a while since Xi Jinping has bothered calling the White House to speak to anyone of Joe Biden's team, let alone the president himself. I know that people are seeing President Trump come back in, and they know that he's serious about several things, including the reform of the Department of Defense. Our foreign policy should always be to strengthen the country, defend our interests, and maybe a new manifest destiny, a new Monroe Doctrine, is on the horizon, where we protect the territories in our hemisphere, not because we are bloodthirsty, but more so because we care about protecting the homeland. Every other country in the world gets to protect their borders, but America is supposed to be this unique case where we don't do any of that. I look at Joe Biden, and I look at a failure. I look at a puppet, and I look at a man whose time and days are numbered. And I look forward to the day when that seat and those addresses command respect again, because respect protects you and I. Respect brings all ships in the harbor up, including, again, the harbor this country has founded, which is on freedom, prosperity, and virtue.
Speaking of respect, I want to be respectful of your time, Ed. I'm just grateful that you've joined me here on the Stone Zone. But I've got a couple more questions. Do you have some time for a few more questions?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So one of the things that I really wanted to highlight on is, Abraham Lincoln said, "A house divided cannot stand." And we're beginning to see the infighting within the Democratic Party sort of mirror the infighting that's happening right now in Los Angeles between local LA County officials, the mayor, and the governor. I mean, literally every local Democrat is turning on each other in Los Angeles and playing the blame game. We're seeing that at the national level amongst the Clintons and the Obamas and the Pelosi's and the Bidens and the Harrises. I mean, they're literally turning on each other. I have to ask the question, Ed, we're now seeing for the second straight time former First Lady Michelle Obama, Big Mike, Michelle Obama, skipping President Carter's funeral and now skipping President Trump's inauguration. I have to begs the question. I mean, is this more of not wanting to be seen around President Donald Trump and more about not wanting to be seen with Barack Obama? Ed, your thoughts on this unique move by a former first lady?
I think you're hitting on something that is quite interesting because I think the notion is that the Obamas, the power couple, the couple that was supposed to bring the Democrat Party into the 21st century with progression, race politics, and exclusion of everything white in this country. They failed, and I do think they're breaking up. I think there's something to that. I think the only thing that was keeping them together was the allure of power and control. And that power and control meant something more than just a library getting built downtown in Chicago, or that at times you get celebrities showing up to pay their homage to the former first family. Yeah, I think that Michelle Obama, first of all, has exposed herself as the un-American trash that she's always been. There's protocol for a reason. It's decorum. We don't love it. I'll be honest with you, I don't love seeing those that persecuted President Trump sitting, feet from him at President Carter's funeral. But you know what? It's protocol. It's what it means to have a country that has rules and order, and again has a legacy. The Obamas, they don't care about any of that. They only cared about power. And I think there was a lot of things that Michelle or Big Mike overlooked during the marriage, because the relationship came with that position of power, the Netflix deals and the celebrity visits. Those have gone away because they've lost power. And I think the things that they overlooked were things like when Barack Obama spoke about his conversation with Alex McNear, his then girlfriend, back when he was younger. And there's a letter that came out, if I recall, where he spoke about where he used to imagine making love to men every day. Now, of course, we've seen the interview Tucker Carlson did with Larry Sinclair, and whether this man's story is credible or not, there were some pretty damning things leveled by Larry Sinclair toward Barack Obama in respect to his homosexual lifestyle. It could be because they don't have faith, they don't have Jesus holding their marriage together, and they certainly don't have their duty to country bringing them to where they need to be every single day to wake up and actually hold some level of respect to the position they used to hold. The only thing that was keeping them together was power. Now that's gone. It seems that the affairs and the bedfellows of the past are coming home to roost. They may break up the once powerful race baiting couple of old.
What's interesting is that in 2008, Barack Obama's historic election basically muted the Clintons and made them completely irrelevant when they were the real leaders of the Democratic Party throughout the 90s and 2000s. But what's interesting is that in 2024, President Donald Trump has muted the Obamas and has taken away their power within their political base. They've now got their best friend like George Clooney. It's been reported that it isn't even talking to the Obamas anymore because he feels like he was duped by Barack Obama and saying, write this opinion piece saying it's time for Joe Biden to go. And they end up losing collectively massively on election day to President Donald Trump. I mean, it essentially guaranteed either way. It guaranteed President Donald Trump's reelection. And so they are in complete and utter disarray. Michelle Obama it's been no secret that she's talked about their marriage struggles in the 1990s and early 2000s. It's no secret that they even had marital issues when they were in the White House. But again, a house divided amongst a Democratic Party, I also have to believe that there must be a house divided within their marriage. And these two key absences, President Carter's funeral, a Democrat, a revered Democrat who was a better post-president than he was U.S. president, and this important and historic inauguration where President Trump won a large mandate. He was very quickly certified. His election results were very quickly certified and peacefully and safely on January 6th. The First Lady, out of obligation, needs to attend the inauguration, if not a funeral. And I think you hit the nail on the head. There is trouble in paradise.
Well, certainly, and I think I point back to our illustrious host of this program. He would say that it's mandatory to show that you don't have something planned to fight against the president in his second term. And I think that is 100% necessary, especially after the Obamas set up their own shadow headquarters in 2017 in our capital with Valerie Jarrett on staff. What were the Obamas doing during President Trump's first term? I would say it's mandatory to show that they don't plan to continue to resist, backbite, and attack President Trump and his allies and his administration. And again, if they don't show up, let's say Barack Obama does and his wife doesn't, we can only assume that they're going to continue a resistance. And thus, the only thing you can do then, politically speaking, is to fully crush them. Maybe it's time to call the permits and call into question how the funding has come about for the Barack Obama library, and maybe have a look at some of the documents that he's including in that Chicago little hold that weirdly has a vault under it. I was hearing. There's a lot of questions that maybe we should have Kash Patel and others look into. Maybe there's some things that need to be addressed, let alone the corruption left over. But that is what I'd say about this. We have to assume that they are going to continue to fight. And if they fight, they must be crushed.
Well, let's leave it there. Edward Szall, investigative journalist and producer of Died Suddenly. Listen, I'm so grateful for you to join me here on the Stone Zone, and I really appreciate your commentary on these big pressing issues.
Thank you so much, Mark. God bless you, and give my best to Roger.
God bless you, and thank you for joining us on the Stone Zone. Edward Szall, what a terrific American and a patriot, and I'm so grateful that he was able to join us here on the Stone Zone to provide some political commentary. But I urge you, implore you to continue to follow and analyze this Obama situation, because I don't think it's going to go away. And in Chicago, Obama is not as popular as one might think outside of Illinois. He abandoned his own neighbors, his own constituents, the people that got him started in politics, who pushed him from fourth place in the U.S. Senate race in 2008 to first place, or in 2004, where he won the nomination and later the Senate race. Again, he was in fourth place, and the person in first place had dropped out because of personal and family issues. But his presidential library is creating a lot of issues and concern because they are gentrifying the area around the Obama Foundation and library, which means residents, particularly Black residents who have lived in that community for generations, they are all being pressured to move out. They're trying to kick these residents out so that big Obama-like developers can go into that community and rebuild it to make it a economic engine that revolves around the presidential library. And so every day Americans, Black residents, are feeling the pressure, feeling the squeeze. Where's the mainstream media reporting on this? Where's the legacy media reporting on this? If you remember, several weeks ago, we had Jessica Jackson here on the Stone Zone from Chicago, where she went into great detail talking about this gentrification. And how does she know? Because she lives in that community and she's feeling the pressure from the Chicago city government and from the court system to try and boot her out of her own home. And so, again, the Obamas have remained wildly unpopular in Chicago, and they are now wildly unpopular across the country, for almost guaranteeing a Kamala Harris win to their fellow Democrats, ripping Joe Biden out of the presidential chair and his reelection campaign and inserting Kamala Harris, and then creating that fake video where Kamala receives a phone call from President Obama talking about how he's going to endorse her campaign, and she's got her Apple iPhones, Apple headphones in her ears, but yet she's hooked up to a professional mic. So how the optics of that this is just a spur of the moment phone call and they happen to be taping her was certainly not true. This has all been orchestrated like a Hollywood production. So stay tuned to the Obamas and trouble in paradise. She continues to remain in their home in Hawaii. They have certainly profited, made a incredible fortune in the post-presidential life. They love going to the most expensive and exclusive restaurants in Hollywood and Beverly Hills. They love living in all of their mansions across the country. They have really benefited post-presidential life as opposed to pre-U.S. senatorial life, where they didn't have any money. His credit cards were being rejected at hotels on the campaign trail. So this is going to be a very interesting story that's going to develop. But in other news, again, as we get closer, we are just days away from the inauguration of President Donald Trump. We're beginning to see these sort of quote unquote woke companies who initiated and happily initiated these DEI programs begin to pull back. We're also seeing Coca-Cola. If you remember, in 2020, Coca-Cola put out a very harsh and critical and ill-advised, in my opinion, statement attacking President Trump on January 6th, how they forgot in 2020 that President Trump said peacefully protest, how they forgot how Nancy Pelosi only years later admitted that she didn't put enough security around the U.S. Capitol. The Capitol Police is controlled by the Speaker of the House. And who was the Speaker of the House? It was Nancy Pelosi. This was all on purpose. That's why you didn't see any rioting and storming the Capitol this past January 6th. Why? Makes a big difference when the president-elect is a president who is committed to law and order, a president who is committed to cleaning up the corruption, a president who is committed to putting violent and dangerous and vicious criminals where they belong, and that's in jail. And so that's why we didn't see any issues this past January 6th, unlike what happened in January 6th of 2020 when the Democrats were in control of the U.S. House of Representatives. But let's take a look. Coca-Cola, the CEO, visits Mar-a-Lago and presents President Trump with the first ever presidential commemorative inaugural Diet Coke bottle. Chairman James Quincy, CEO of the Coca-Cola Company. And again, we're beginning to see these CEOs of these woke companies now making their trek over to Mar-a-Lago to meet with President Donald Trump, who, as you know, is an avid Diet Coke drinker. One of my favorite stories of President Trump in his first term, I believe he was meeting with reporters there in the Oval Office, and there is a little wooden box that sits on the desk, the Resolute desk there in the Oval Office, and it's got a little red button, and the box has a beautiful presidential seal right on the front of it. But if you remember, President Trump was talking about big red buttons, and when him and little Rocket Man were going back and forth, and he talked about that President Trump told little Rocket Man, North Korea's dictator Kim Jong-un, that I have a red button on my desk. It's bigger than yours, and unlike your red button, mine works. So when President Trump was meeting with reporters in the Oval Office, they noticed that little box with the red button, and President Trump purposefully pressed that red button, and I believe the reporters were kind of looking at each other wondering, what did he just do? Did he just communicate or send a message to the Pentagon and to our forces? But about a minute and a half later, a White House steward arrives with a tray, and on that tray was the president's Diet Coke. So that's what the president would use to summon a White House steward to bring him another Diet Coke. But we're seeing Jeff Bezos from Amazon and the owner of the Washington Post make his way over to Mar-a-Lago. We saw Mark Zuckerberg make his way over to Mar-a-Lago. We're seeing a lot of these CEOs meet with President Trump at his own home court advantage, his Palm Beach, Florida residence, to talk about how we sort of right the ship now, that he's going to be the 47th president of the United States and that he was elected by such a wide mandate. We are also hearing that a number of companies are now ending their DEI programs. It is clear DEI, what the D stands for in DEI is dying. The DEI programs are dying across the country. And here is a long list of companies that have made very public announcements that they will be ending their DEI programs. I won't share all of them because the list is long and good, but allow me to read just a few of these companies: Amazon, Meta, American Airlines, Boeing, Jack Daniels maker Brown-Forman, Caterpillar, Ford, Harley-Davidson, John Deere, Lowe's, Nissan, Polaris, Toyota, Walmart, and the list goes on and on and on. And why are these major corporations canceling their DEI programs? Because of President Trump's election and how he's been critical of these programs, that these programs aren't about equality. It's about showing favoritism to certain groups and shutting out anybody that is white. It's about making sure you check boxes where you look at where you judge someone's outward appearance instead of their quality of work and their experience and their expertise. That is why these programs are ending. I mean, didn't Martin Luther King Jr. so famously say, judge a man's character not by the color of his skin, but by the content of his character? And I'd like to add the quality of his work and his experience. That's what companies should be looking for: quality of work, experience, and expertise, not so that they can check a box and say, you know what, we like this person because we need to add more diversity. We need to add more color. Once you go down that rabbit hole, it becomes very dangerous. In more local news, in Illinois, by the way, you're going to love this. In Illinois, the governor and the Democrats, despite all of the chaos that's happening in Chicago, and I'd like to highlight this story very briefly to talk about just the chaos that's happening in Chicago over their sanctuary city status. Chicago Alderman Raymond Lopez and Silvana Tabares, they proposed in Chicago's city council about tweaking the city's sanctuary status, which currently prevents local law enforcement from working with ICE. They wanted to include an exception, listen to this, that would allow police to cooperate with ICE in cases targeting those convicted of crimes such as gang activity, sex trafficking, and drug-related crimes. So very violent and dangerous individuals. They put together a proposal in Chicago City Council to say, let's carve out an exception to allow ICE to go after these very violent and dangerous individuals. And what happened in the liberal Chicago City Council? They voted against that measure 39-11. So again, while the migrant crisis has taken over the city of Chicago, where they've allocated literally billions of dollars to make sure that migrants have food, clothing, shelter, housing, while their own residents in the South and West Side communities of Chicago, predominantly Black residents, are starving and dying, and their streets are riddled with crime and literally riddled with bullets because of gang activities. What does Chicago politicians and the governor want to do? They want to put together a new flag. They're proposing changing Illinois' flag, and so they've got all these different options for people to vote on. These are the top 10 finalists of changing Illinois' flag. Now, you saw their current flag there on the bottom row on the far left, and these are the proposed finalists of changing the flag. But listen, in a state where you have lives and livelihood that have been completely destroyed because of the Governor Pritzker's dictatorship during the pandemic. You have students, 30,000 Chicago public school students haven't returned to school since the pandemic. You've had a rise in violent crime and carjackings and crimes on the Chicago public transit system, like the trains. You have Chicago having, with a high unemployment rate, Chicago and Illinois, one of the slowest in the nation in terms of economic recovery. You have the governor and the Chicago mayor, the mayor who has the lowest approval rating of any mayor in Chicago's history since its incorporation in the late 1800s, 14% approval rating. And they have a massive budget crisis. And what does the Democratic politicians and the Democratic governor want to focus on? Changing Chicago or Illinois' state flag. These priorities are completely irrelevant to what's really is required to not only making America great again, but making Illinois a state where they've lost hundreds of thousands of residents because of their poor business climate, because of the high taxes that have moved to places like Texas and to Florida. Major businesses driving out Ken Griffin, who's worth $40 billion, and his company, and moving it down to Miami. And what went with Ken Griffin? But thousands of millionaires followed Ken Griffin down to Miami, Florida, Chicago losing all of the tax monies from economic development and income tax. It's left a massive gap in their state and local budget. But what do we want to focus on instead? Chicago city officials want to focus on changing the flag. It's yet another reason why the Democratic Party is completely irrelevant and in a total tailspin, because they no longer represent the American people. They no longer have their finger on the pulse of the American people. It is President Trump and the MAGA movement that is going to make America great again. Well, that wraps up our show. Roger Stone will be back. He's getting ready for inaugural festivities this weekend. But thank you for tuning in. God bless you. God bless America. And good night.
A man who's gone through hell, but he's kept going, and he's smart and he's strong, and people love him. Not everybody, but people love him and respect him. Roger Stone. Where's Roger Stone?